What's up, Mullen fans? Back with another video. This particular video will be showing the interview between David Mishery and Wes Christian. They will be discussing the illegal trading activities that short sellers are doing. They talk about naked shorting. They talk about spoofing. They also talk about how shorts are able to cover when the company issues more shares. Wes Christian is absolutely on fire with this one. He's found a lot of illegal trading activities within Mullen Automotive, and also says that out of all the companies he's been investigating, Mullen is up in the top few of most manipulated stocks out there. And I've been covering Mullen Automotive stock since March of 2022. A lot of people called me a conspiracy theorist when I started talking about illegal trading activities, naked short, and failure to deliver piling up in Mullen Automotive stock for the longest time. Way before people were even talking about that being an issue. Here we are now with a lawsuit in the works. These things are the trending topics for Mullen Automotive Company. Now, I have another video that's going to be discussing details about Mullen possibly, most likely, requesting an appeal for a hearing to get compliance, or at least by chance another 180-day extension. More details to follow on that. I will try to get that video out to you most likely tomorrow. So Mullen fans, be sure to get as much information as you can out of this video, this interview, and I will catch you guys in the next video. I'm gone.
Hey Wes, how's your holiday going today? Well, not so good, buddy. We're having to work most of the holiday on multiple things across the country that we're the wrongs that we're trying to make right, David. Wrongs that we're trying to make right. So I can understand that. I thought about the interview we did on Fox, and I understand the time constraints there, and coming in at 2:55 Eastern and literally having about 5 minutes. I know people thought that there were technical difficulties on our end, and I can assure them that they were not. But in the interim, I thought that it would be great for you and I to go over a couple of key points. Specifically, I think this suit, so that our shareholders and the general public can really get an understanding of what's really going on here, and not just from my perspective, but from a perspective of an expert or a collective group of experts that have done this, for many, many years and understand what's going on. So with that, I would appreciate you taking some time to recap what we announced that day on Fox, and then maybe getting into some detail to educate some of our shareholders and the general public as to what that really means. Sure. Take it away, buddy. Sure, David. I'd be happy to. So let me put this in context and set it up properly so that all your shareholders can understand. First, our group, which is, don't forget, it's not just my firm. It's Alan Pollock in New York with his firm, Warshaw Bernstein. And now there are other law firms in this space, Cohen Milstein and others, that are recognizing the magnitude of this problem. We've been on this trail for 21 years. We've handled over 21 lawsuits. We've done due diligence on over 75 companies. We looked at over 200 million pages of documents over the years. We were involved, at least I was involved with John O'Quinn and others back then. This was before Alan, in helping get Reg Show passed. We had a lobbyist. I've met with SEC until my head is spun, almost off. I've done the same thing with Congress. I'm in consulting with Congress right now in the last year. Why? Because this is the time really that we're in to ultimately cause a change to stop this carnage. As I've stated many times on other YouTubes and other public formats, this is financial terrorism on America. And it is because at its base level, it's about lying, cheating, and stealing, okay? The lie is that they're selling real shares or they're lending real shares, okay? The cheating is they're breaking all the rules to do that. The stealing is they're pocketing money and giving some poor person that bought the shares nothing. And so at the end of the day, this is the biggest heist in the history of the United States, in my view. And as I've shared with you multiple times, and I'll say it publicly, out of the 75, 6, 7, somewhere in there, public companies that we've looked at, in due diligence. Your company is in the top several of the most manipulated companies I've been able to see preliminarily from the due diligence. And as you know, that due diligence is ongoing, and I believe there'll be more to add to this lawsuit or in a separate lawsuit. This is just the first strike from the first evidence that we found of wrongdoing. So over the years, essentially what's happened pre-reg show, which went into effect January 1 of 2005, there was not a large amount of shares to deliver. And you can look at the data on that and extract it from a book that Suzanne Trimbath wrote called Naked, Short, and Greedy. It's one of the best books on the topic. And it will show you that the fails pre-2000 were very small. Dr. Rob Shapiro, who is our economic expert, has written a paper that says 500 million to a billion shares per day at the time of that paper, which was several years ago, failed to timely deliver. That's 500 million to a billion. Now, it's harder to track that number these days because guess what? Once Reg Show came into effect, they started marking shares long versus short. So if they mark them long, it doesn't go into your short interest, David. So your short interest typically is almost double what it's reported to be. So when you see 45, 50, 55, 60% short, which is being publicly reported on your stock, it's materially more, in my view, if history repeats itself, which it usually does. Number two, back then, the SEC required, and they still do, that you either mark a share long, short, or exempt. So if you mark it long, it not only doesn't show up in your short interest, it doesn't show up in the Reg Show fail threshold list either, because the threshold list doesn't apply to longs, it applies to shorts. And so that's one way that they try to circumvent the system. Of course, our experts have taught us that circumventing Reg Show is a violation of Reg Show. You can't circumvent a law and then say, oh, I didn't violate it. That isn't how the law works. That's called stupidity, is what that's called. So ultimately, at the end of the day, in addition to that, they're using customers' cash account shares to borrow against or to lend others. There's two types of shares that the customers have when they go put it with their broker. One is in a margin account, and sadly, when you sign that margin agreement, they can actually lend your shares. But in a cash account, it's segregated. It's segregated such that the brokerage firm can't touch it. Even if they went into bankruptcy, it's in a SEG account, SEG, an acronym for segregated. So one of the allegations in your case, which we believe is very true, is those defendants, TD and Schwab and NFS, which is Fidelity, were taking those cash account shares and either using them to short, for their own customers, or ultimately lending it out to others to short, and then ultimately covering that what would be a fail. It is a fail. Legally, it is a fail. If you use a share that you Xeroxed on your Xerox machine as your good borrow, that is not a legal short. If you used a share that was restricted, that's not a legal short. You have to use a real unrestricted share and have a reasonable belief that you can borrow it. Most importantly, you are prohibited. You can't do it. And you cannot use people's cash account shares. Those are the holy grail of the stock ownership, okay? Those shares, we believe in your case, are being used. That's what we've alleged in the complaint. So ultimately, that's illegal. That ultimately then allows them to cover once some of the convertibles you've done and you issue shares with real shares. So ultimately, at the end of the day, that practice is illegal. There are many other ways they do it. They lend shares that they don't have. They sell shares that they don't deliver. There are some other optics in your stock that ultimately are breathtaking. When you look at the 19 to 54 million imbalances, and I'll give some more color. We didn't have time to explain it on Charles Payne's show. An imbalance is a phrase that is used during a proxy vote. So if during a vote, you send out to Broadridge, who is a proxy agent, that is, Broadridge mails out the proxies to all the shareholders. And most importantly, when I say mails out the proxies, they gain information from each broker as to how many shares that broker beneficially owns to vote on a given day. That is the record date of the meeting, the record date of the proxy is going to take effect. So ultimately, the broker then reports to Broadridge how many shares they beneficially own on that day for purposes of voting. When we have brokers just in the top 10 that have 54 million shares more that they're reporting to Broadridge than they have at the DTC, that's a problem. That's a huge problem. And in your case, it's recurring, it's persistent, it's not going away. It's getting bigger on most days, okay? And don't forget, that's just information from the DTC. What your shareholders need to understand as part of our due diligence, we're going to figure out ultimately what's being traded internationally. That's another place they're going to now, is trading out of Germany, trading out of Ireland, trading out of the UK and other places through Euroclear. So we've got a whole separate group that's working on that. The information in our complaint is only with respect to shares we can prove at the DTC, okay? And that disparity between Broadridge and the DTC. So my educated guess is I believe that number is going to be much, much larger. Why? Because they're using X clearing. X clearing is a form of one broker trading to another broker, not through the DTC. As I've said in many YouTubes, it's a separate set of books. Basically, they have one book for the DTC. They have another book between broker to broker, okay? So we don't have access to that information called X clearing. We also don't have access to the information of dark pools, which is why we've advocated for transparency all along, and we've yet to be given that, from the SEC or others. So ultimately, what your lawsuit is about is injecting false information into the marketplace. Hey, this is a real sale. We made a real borrow, and that ultimately creates counterfeit, artificial, phantom shares. When supply exceeds demand on a given day, the price is always going to go down. It, in effect, is rigging the market. It would be no different than dealing off the bottom of the deck in Las Vegas in a blackjack game. It is rigging the market. As a result, you sold shares, many shares, in that time period that we put in the complaint. And in doing so, you had to sell them at a price well below what they should have been sold for, but for the bad acts of those defendants. And so ultimately, Alan Pollack and his firm, who frankly get most of the credit for drafting that complaint, that's one of their best uses on the team. It demonstrates pretty graphically how it works. It demonstrates who the perpetrators are. The imbalances are in the complaint. The fails are overlaid over that. So what we attempted to do is tie in the fails to the imbalances to the counterfeit shares. And so that's kind of a summary version of it. And as time goes on, we've got other things we're looking at that are proprietary. I'm not going to talk about in a public forum, but it will ultimately cause us to discover more bad acts and more defendants. And then we'll deal with that as we go along.
Wes, thank you. I thought that was amazing. Every time I hear you discuss the points, it really resonates with me because I've lived it firsthand. Unless you actually have it happen to you, I mean, you don't really know the full extent of what it is until until it's brought upon you. From my perspective,
well, most people. I'm sorry, David. Most people don't understand the magnitude of it. I've said this many times. I've talked to a public official, who I will never name, some years ago that said at that time it was about $100 trillion fraud that's been stolen, the money that's been stolen out of the United States. Now, to not be misleading, that included bonds, that included stock, that included other financial instruments. So this doesn't just apply, David, to stock. At the source of this problem is electronic delivery. The Depository Trust Corporation was created with its middle name as trust, okay? Well, what's happened is shares aren't being delivered. Brokers, don't forget there's a counterparty. The brokers on the other side, the that represents the buyer aren't buying the seller in, and they're not doing it because when they're selling shares, they're not delivering either. So you buy me in, I'm going to buy you in. So ultimately, it's a merry-go-round that the prime brokers and multiple hedge funds and other fat cats are using to steal money. That's basically what it is stealing. And ultimately, it has cost jobs, David. It has killed technology, David. It has destroyed lives, David. It has ultimately not only destroyed the market cap of companies, in many cases it put them in bankruptcy. Now, some of these companies would have failed on their own because that's just the way it works if you look at it statistically. But you should not be able to rig the system. And if they disallowed this electronic delivery, it wouldn't happen. The poor auditors can't keep up with this. They put the trade through Hong Kong and send it through London to here. You think an auditor can follow all that and see that the shares are there? Sadly, the auditors don't even ever count the shares. They just want to see that the brokerage firm has the cash necessary to cover the contingent liability, that is the shares that they haven't delivered. Well, what the auditor doesn't know is that share used to be worth 10 times as much before it was manipulated down. So the best thing the brokers can do is manipulate it down. They not only get to steal more money, if they ever have to cover, they're going to cover it 2 pennies on the dollar, or maybe never have to cover it all. So they have all the incentive in the world to take that contingent liability on their books and take it to zero. That's simple.
Sounds just like Mullen. I mean, honest to God, Wes, I don't know how these people find me. Meaning, I know it's a blessing and a curse. I know that we have a tremendous fan base, loyal followers. We have a cult-like following. I know people really believe in what we're trying to do and trying to bring jobs to America. We're a good American company with American passion and ingenuity. And I just don't know how these guys find us. I mean, it seems to me that we bring out the best in people, don't we? But I will tell you this.
Well, they can. They find you because you were a startup in the sense of a company that had a market cap of less than $2 billion or whatever. I forget what your market cap was initially, but basically they can't do this to a Microsoft. They can't do this to an IBM, et cetera. And that's the sad part. Most jobs come from companies that are formed and grow. Most technology ultimately tries to go public. Well, who the hell wants to go public if they make more money killing you than they do building you? And incidentally, when they kill you, they can rig the system so you are going to get killed unless you go kill them first. Okay, so which is what these lawsuits are about. These lawsuits are about, we're going to find you, we're going to expose you, we're going to make you pay. That's simple. And ultimately, I'm hoping the Department of Justice gets involved in this, which they have recently. Don't forget, we haven't even started the spoofing analysis on your company. We're going to do that next. So at the end of the day, that's another illegal act that's being done, posting these baiting orders, these fake orders that say sell, 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 that are never consummated by these market makers and others, Citadel, Virtue, and others in cases. So at the end of the day, the spoofing is a big piece also. They recently convicted some people at Morgan and who apparently are going to jail. And I think Morgan paid over a $900 million fine for that. And as my dad used to say, if you pay over a $900 million fine, you're screwing somebody. Okay, so ultimately, the fines and the sanctions and the enforcement actions, I thank the SEC for doing it. I thank FINRA for doing it. But frankly, with that one exception in Morgan's case, the penalty is not commensurate with the crime. It is a traffic fine. And many people have said this, including people at the SEC, including other, congressmen, etc. The enforcement actions are fine. It proves up it's happening, but it's not stopping it. People need to go to jail for this, David. Period.
Let me ask you a question. You brought up a good point. Excuse my ignorance here. Would you mind explaining spoofing maybe in a little detail, so not just myself, but my shareholders and
yeah, I'm gonna explain it in just simple terms. A bona fide market maker today under rib show is one of the few exceptions that exist. What that means is, if you're a market maker, you're there to create activity, to make a market. That's the purpose of the market maker, right? And as such, your book, as they call it, should be, 49% sales and 51% buys.
They add
Or,
liquidity.
maybe very 5%.
Add
But
liquidity.
when your activity is sell side heavy, like 70% sales and 30% buys, or 60% sales and 40% buys, you're not a bona fide market maker. So I believe that there are many market makers, and this is in other complaints we have, and I'll get into those in a minute, that are abusing that exception and basically naked shorting and not delivering because they have that ability to use that exception. The exception says, if you read it, if you are a bona fide market maker, you do not have to borrow. Why? Because in theory, you're in and out in the same day, and it all kind of balances, okay? So at the end of the day, spoofing is where all these orders are posted. Let's call them sell orders. They're called baiting orders, technically, from a legal perspective. They're put there to bait people into a perception. The perception is, oh my God, look how many shares are up for sale on this block here, okay? I call it a brick wall, okay? There's so many shares up there. But guess what? In many instances, before the end of the day, those are pulled down. They're not real. They're put up there to drive the price down. Now, is the market maker making money off of that? That depends on the case. They put the fake orders up there, and then ultimately they have a short somewhere else, and then they go buy it at the lower price. Or they're in it with the other perpetrators that are doing the naked short selling. It varies case to case. But the simple version is, it's injecting more lies into the marketplace, which is the definition of a manipulation claim under 10b-5, which is a federal statute, that says stock manipulation is not okay. You have the right to sue for it. So you look at predicate acts of what false information was injected, and you tie that false information to the damage to the client, and that's what we did in the complaint. We showed what the false information was in that case, using those shares they couldn't authorize, naked short selling. And at that time, you sold shares at a depressed price. So we tied A to B, and that's what makes a case. And so it's my belief, ultimately, that we'll tie spoofing together in your case also, but I don't know that at this point. But I can tell you this, we're going to find out, buddy. We're going to find out because we know how to do it. But I'm out of time, my friend. So I think this has been good, and I think you ought to do this more often. All right?
Sure. Like I said, Wes, we just want to, do good by our shareholders. We want to create jobs in America, and we want to be proud about the products we put on the street. So with that, I want to thank you. Wish you all the luck. I'm right there with you in the fight. I'm in the trenches, and we're going to make it happen.
Amen, brother. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
All right?
Amen.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.